Welcome to this fourth session in this series in parenting. Today we'll be talking about defensiveness and facing separation. The defensiveness is our natural protection system for our minds. You see, our brain can do two things really well. We can defend to protect us against vulnerability, or we can grow. It's the miracle of growing up. But our brain can't do both at the same time. These are instincts. Defensiveness is an instinct. And we don't get to choose which one of these paths the brain's processing will take. You see, when we get any input into our brains, some of it goes off to the side and we ask the question, am I safe? And if the brain, the hippocampus specifically, alerts and sees that there's danger, it'll move us to defense. And defense is good situationally if there is danger in front of us. It allows us to operate in a wounding world, such as at school and at work. We can't totally be vulnerable in all of life, but we always need a place to go home to at the end of the day, a place to feel safe, to unwind. Maybe at the end of the day or at the end of the week, we need that place of safety. The more we're growing, the more time we need in that place of rest, that place of connection, and having the freedom for creative play. Defensiveness is not a disorder. It's not something that we fix. It's not something that's bad. We're all hardwired to notice danger and protect ourselves. And this is a really good thing. It's only when this impulse gets stuck that problems arise. And that's what we'll be looking at today. And here we seek to soften the defenses, not eliminate them altogether. So in the short term, defensiveness can look good. It can actually help us to function better in a wounding environment, in a wounding world. It'll make us less anxious. We'll be ready to engage with things. We'll feel a boost in confidence. It can help us maintain a healthy distance from people who are demanding. Interesting enough, if we deny reality just momentarily, it can allow us time to adjust to a difficult and stressful situation, to get our orientation before we move forward. Thinking positively can help us maintain mental health. And sometimes we become lost in a book or have a daydream. These things too could help create creativity and boost our problem-solving skill.
So that's a defensiveness, actually?
It is.
That type of daydreaming or totally getting immersed in a book?
It's tuning out the world, turning away from the world a little bit. So we can just focus in one place.
But it's our brain actually, in a way, having a defensive.
It's a defensive response.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, peer-attached children in grade 1 and 2, they appear to do better. Peer-attached children, they have lots of defenses in place. And we can confuse this defendedness with health. But what's happening here is, yes, in the moment it seems really good. We celebrate their social confidence, their attentiveness to learn, because they are less anxious.
So that's what might look like on the surface. And we're saying with younger children, especially in school age.
Yeah, they'll be less anxious in that classroom setting.
Because their brain isn't...
Their brain is defended from being too vulnerable.
From being wounded.
They're not feeling everything. So as we're teaching them, they're not getting stuck up in, I'm not sure about this, and I'm not sure if that person likes me, or I don't know how playtime will go, or...
Right. Where if you're feeling every moment of your day at school or work, it could be very
overwhelming.
Could be alarming, overwhelming, too many emotions to be able to process.
I remember I did a conference I was helping out in the audiovisual about 2 months ago. And at home, I'm quite vulnerable. My defenses are down. I feel everything. But then I went to this conference to help out. I was in a work environment. I had to tune back a little bit my emotions, my sensing, so I could actually focus on the job. I couldn't stop in every moment and process and say, what am I feeling right now? And how should I move forward? I needed to be a little bit defended.
Right. And depending on our jobs, we all may have certainly areas where we need to be defended in order to actually function and do our jobs, right?
Yes.
Say someone who's medical emergency personnel, they can't be feeling everything in the moment, or
No.
they would not be able to do their job.
That's correct. They need to triage. They need to care for the patients.
But that is
becoming ill.
actually our brain that's able to help us do that.
It is, yes. Yeah. So this is great in the short term. However, the long-term results aren't so good. If we're always having to defend, we don't have a place to go home to. The child, for example, who's peer attached in their middle and high schools, they won't be doing as well. Their relationship skills won't have grown, and at best they'll have average grades. They'll be less attentive to what's happening, to what the teacher is saying.
And so this is because they've been defended, we're saying, even longer?
Yes.
The further you get in school, if you remain in a long-term defensive state.
Mm-hmm. There's no room for growth. We need a little bit of room for growth to happen. They'll be less mature, they'll less integrated, more impulsive, and the amount of disorders that they could qualify for is significant. At least the symptoms that we see here. Unfortunately, this defensiveness is also diagnosed as a disorder of some sort in some children. But defensiveness is not a disorder.
On its own.
On its own, it's not a disorder. Though these characteristics may certainly look like it, like they're not able to concentrate. They're stuck, they can't let go of hurts. They justify their anger, their actions. They certainly don't listen to anyone else. They're completely tuned out of what the teacher is trying to instruct them to do. So our goal then is not simply to get the children to be able to function in a wounding world. It's for them to realize their full potential as human beings, to give them some space to grow, to mature, to become integrated. So here we have the immature are more prone to defense. So a younger child is more immature. They're more vulnerable. They're more easily wounded. However, the more mature a child gets, the more adaptive, the more integrative the child is, the more emergent they are.
Not always by age,
Not
as
by
we've
age.
mentioned.
Yes, not always by age. But if they've had some chance to
mature,
then they're less affected by the bumps and bruises of one's world. So our focus is always on the young child and the immature child, whatever age they are. And we must attend to them most closely. Now, there are 3 ways in which the brain defends. So the first here is the emotional defense. This is our brain's ability to filter out our feelings. It prevents an overload of information. And this defense is predominantly automatically. If we took in every sense that we had, we'd just become overwhelmed. Every noise, every click, every touch, we couldn't even function in the world. If the defense is more than just situational, it leads to a significant loss of feelings. So if you don't feel, you don't know that you're tired or that you're hungry. A child might say, I don't care, or it doesn't matter, or I'm not scared. They lose their embarrassment and they no longer blush. They're not timid anymore. They also don't try and conceal when they feel ashamed, and they're certainly brazen in their appearance. So Brené Brown, in her research, found that most adults today only are able to identify actually having 3 emotions. That's how stuck quite often adults are. And she says the emotions are happy, sad, and ticked off. You see, we're extremely defended in our society today. There should be about 100 emotions that we feel in our day-to-day life.
That's a big difference from 3.
It's huge. The quality of life is very different, their perspective. To be fully human is to be able to feel shame, embarrassment, alarm, to feel guilt, or even responsibility. And some of these are very uncomfortable emotions, but we must be able to feel all of these things to experience all of life. Now, we have a backup defense, something that we can turn on, and that's our perceptual defense. We can simply turn away from what makes us feel bad. We can just ignore it. This can be impulsive, or it can be a cognitive choice. When we turn away, there's a sense of missing something, a blindness to this. For example, not only will we become unaware when others reject us, but we'll also become unaware when people are actually inviting us into their presence.
I remember as a child when there were certain big events that happened in our family, like our farm burnt, was on fire. And I was quite young, and I remember thinking, if I just close my eyes, go back to bed, I'll, kind of like pretend like this isn't actually happening. I thought if I could shut it out, is that sort of an example of this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And situationally, that it can actually be helpful because it can help us get through the moment. But yeah, long term, this is not good.
You can't hide from everything that makes you feel bad.
No. No. We need to engage it at some point. So this can also lead to a false sense of self-esteem. So for the bully, perhaps, they may appear full of self-esteem, but they're simply unaware of their shortcomings. They can't admit that others don't like them or that they're a bad leader, because that's just way too vulnerable.
So in a way, on the surface, a lot of these things can look like there isn't a problem.
Yeah.
Like kid functions well at school, or they look like, they have good self-esteem, but that's not necessarily, if there's other things missing, we need to be aware of that.
If the vulnerability is missing, they can't process their disappointments in life.
Right.
There's another set of defenses, the attachment defenses. Here we have a reversing of the attachment instincts. There's a sense of the relationship being out of order in some way. Here we have 3 defenses, and we'll look more at these later in this session. Now, some children are more likely to defend than others, and there's 2 factors to this. First, how sensitive they are. A highly sensitive person feels strongly. Sometimes we confuse this with being too emotional, but this is not being too emotional, because being too emotional is a response, it's in the moment. Being highly sensitive is about the reactivity of our senses. This is not a disorder, but rather a personality trait. We think about 20% of the population is highly sensitive, and genetics plays a huge factor here. If you have 2 very sensitive parents, they're much more likely to have a child who's highly sensitive. Sensitivity can also be learnt for several reasons, such as embodying a traumatic event, or sometimes a symptom of conditions like ADHD or autism. If you're highly sensitive, noisy environments such as a crowded mall or violent movies or graphics might bother you. Conversely, you might also savour pleasant stimuli, like a good meal, a wonderful song. Your sensitivity to others' feelings might help you cultivate strong relationships. Creative people tend to sense a wider range of stimuli, enabling to come up with more creative ideas. Ultimately, the more sensitive the child is, the more easily they can be hurt, and the quicker they are to move to defense. The second issue has to do with the amount of wounding in their environment. How much separation do they face? Is their dignity being attacked, or how much rejection are they facing? You see, none of us can be alarmed for too long or for too much. Unfortunately, discipline practices often use wounding to enact compliance. Like traditionally, there was the use of fear. In many cultures, you'll see a use of shame. And now we seem to be using this separation, which is the most wounding of all. Today, peer interaction is also a major source of wounding in child's lives. As we put our children together earlier and earlier, the more children matter to each other, the more it sets them up for getting hurt. It's then the combination of sensitivity and wounding that makes the child more likely to defend. The sensitivity is ever present. We can't do anything to reduce this, as much as we try. What we can do, though, is reduce the wounding. We can do this by changing our discipline practice or winning our child back from their peers.
And I think with highly sensitive children, I think it's a somewhat newer area that we have gained some understanding, and there's research being done in actually how the brain of a highly sensitive person reacts a little bit differently, as you've said, to our senses. But highly sensitive people can often think there's something wrong with them. And our culture or our environments may tell us there's something wrong with you. And it can be really hard to process all of that, plus be in a wounding environment. And how do we support? Because we can't reduce all wounding.
No.
We can't put the kids in a bubble. But yet, there's a real gift and the beauty of having a sensitive child, a sensitive person. So I think it's an area that I think people are talking more about. Mm-hmm. I know there's some books that have just recently been released about sensitivity and the gift of it as an adult. A lot of adults never knew, oh, that's why I was like that as a child, but never knew really why they felt different, why they experienced things differently. So I think it's an area that's good to think about with the children that are our own children or children that we work with.
Mm-hmm. And as we mentioned, this is not a disorder.
No. I mean, in there, even within, like you mentioned, say a child with autism or ADHD, there might be some similarities, or even, I think you use the word symptom, but sensitivity in a highly sensitive person actually functions in the brain a little differently than someone with autism. It might, on the surface, look like there's some similarities, but this is an area that is more of like a personality trait. It's just who we are.
Yeah. And quite often, highly sensitive people go into caring professions. Mm-hmm. They're very valuable within the community.
Oh, very. And they're very creative. They look at solutions from a different perspective. Because you feel things so deeply, they can be very empathetic if it hasn't been all squashed in them. But yeah, I think it's an interesting area that people are, there's more research being done and more learning about it. Yeah.
And as we said, we can't reduce sensitivity. But there is one capacity here to help us recover quickly from difficulties. That is the adaptive process. We call this resilience or toughness.
I remember when our daughter first went to school, and she's very highly sensitive. Someone's like, well, Jen, you just got to get her to toughen up. School was really hard for her. And this friend said, well, she's just got to toughen up. That's the answer.
Yeah. So resilience isn't a reduction in sensitivity. Yeah. This is really out of our hands. Mm-hmm. What we want to do is to prime the development of resilience. Mm-hmm. We're here to comfort, to make a way for them to experience the futility when something's not working for them.
And still be a sensitive, if we're talking about sensitivity, still be a sensitive person and resilient, not losing, not losing your feelings, not losing all of that part of you. Yeah.
So the temptation is to rescue the child.
Yes, I've done that.
So of course we need to reduce the amount of wounding that they directly cause.
As much as we can, yeah.
But there are many things that just don't work for the child in everyday life. The sibling may not want to share, or they may not get their favourite food, or the playtime must come to an end. If it's an encounter with futility, this is what grows the resilience. And we also can't ever spoil our children by loving them too much, by offering them too many hugs, or by caring for them, providing for their needs. But spoiling our child is by always standing in the way of the adaptive process, when restrictions are encountered. Some rescuing is okay, but we mustn't make a habit of it.
It can be hard for us as a parent, perhaps, or a teacher, to not step in and like, okay, I'll just kind of clean this up.
Yeah. So the everyday futilities.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's an ongoing futility, maybe we need to look at that. Mm-hmm. Maybe if it's a split parenting situation and there's too much separation. Mm-hmm. These are things that we can jump into. But the everyday things, like the sister doesn't want to share, that's where the resilience grows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as we ourselves can't be afraid of that upset.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I was pointing to, is that we might rescue because we're uncomfortable with those places of upset.
Yeah. So here's an example of when we lose our feelings, when we're defended. and how it might impact our lives. So if we've lost our ability to feel sad about the things that we can't change in life, we'll also lose the ability to feel fulfilled, to feel joy by what does work. And I love the story of Inside Out from Pixar, where they do have this character of sadness and the character of joy. And to come to a deeper joy, we have to feel the futilities of life, the sadness about different situations. And then we become to appreciate more what does work.
Mm-hmm.
And here I've summarized really the movements of feelings that we've been talking about over the last 3 sessions for emergence, adapting, and integrating. So if we don't feel dependence, if we don't feel woundedness, if we don't feel futility, or the attack or the caring, then we're not growing, we're not moving forward. We need to have all of these feelings in which to grow, or at least a space for these to happen. Mm-hmm. Maybe not all day long, but at least to come home, to have rest, to have that creative play in which we can explore and feel these things. And the invitation to have our tears. In a parenting workshop that we had recently, asked, can I hug my child too much?
Right. The husband thought the wife hugs the kids too much.
No, you cannot.
Rescuing them may be too much.
Yes, rescuing
you just
them,
said.
but not hugs. Give them more hugs than they need. So I used to love, I still do quite often, is I hug longer and let the child let go. Mm-hmm. So when they're filled, when they feel their fullness, then I let go. Mm-hmm. So far we've defined defensiveness and looked at the mechanisms we use to defend. Now, what are we defending against? What is our greatest threat? Well, facing separation is the greatest threat for all of us. Our greatest need is connection, and so separation is that threat that we all face. And this separation can be experienced or simply anticipated, simply the possibility of separation. Mm-hmm. We might sense that maybe I might get rejected, so I'm going to reject first. Mm-hmm. When we face separation, it evokes 3 primary emotions in us, which have profound impact on our behavior. So we're going to explore over this next little while in the session these 3 emotions, these 3 primary emotions. The first one is pursuit, which normally moves the child to stay close, to restore proximity. We also have alarm, which moves the child to caution to avoid the separation. We also have frustration because the child feels the attachment isn't working. So the child's move to effect change, to fix that separation problem. Perhaps they try and negotiate a different outcome. So the child's emotions are looking for a way to reduce the separation they face. And there'll always be 3 emotions moving. A young child can't feel all of these big emotions at the same time, and many adults can't either. So when separation is faced, these emotions are likely going to cycle. You might see a child engage pursuit in the moment and stay close to us. This is great for us as parents. Perhaps it's time to leave, and we duck around the corner. The child runs after us. Mummy, 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 don't leave me.
Realizes you're gone. Mm-hmm.
And we've got them following us. Mm-hmm. But later on, you'll see some indications that the child is alarmed. They'll think, there are monsters under the bed. Or perhaps there's something in the closet. And the next day, you'll see some frustration come out, such as the sibling getting attacked. But we don't put all these things together.
So are you saying if we only see one of them, chances are the others are also there?
They'll come out at some point in time because they're all really big emotions. Mm-hmm. So perhaps you'll see a teenager's full of anxiety, but we don't know where it comes from. Or a young man might be angry all the time, full of frustration. Or a spouse might be overly clingy. We call this anxious attachment. There was a separation at some point in time that they experienced, but it's not fully resolved. These emotions hadn't been processed.
So what about, I know a lot of, especially with younger children, we talk about separation anxiety. right? Especially like say when kids first start daycare or kindergarten or school.
There's a pursuit to restore the proximity.
So we should expect to see alarm and frustration as well.
We will.
Yeah.
We will. We'll see them maybe biting. We'll get reports back saying they're disruptive in class.
There may be that, as we've talked about, aggression that comes out of frustration. Could be there.
Yep. They might have dreams and nightmares at nighttime. The sleeping might be a difficult transition for them because that's another separation for our kids is when they go to sleep. Yeah. So we'll see all of these things coming out, but we won't relate them together. So we step back and look at all three of these areas and know that there's some separation that they're facing. So we all face separation in life. Mummy might be going to work, daddy might be going on a trip. There's a baby coming, and I'm not going to get mummy's attention all the time. In these moments, if the futility is encountered and felt, the child can adapt to the separation that's faced. In essence, if the child learns to hold on when apart, if the connection can be maintained in the face of separation.
That's the key to addressing these concerns.
We never get better at practicing separation. That's impossible.
We think we do. We believe we do, though, right? If I just keep pushing my kid into school, hope they stay there without losing it, crying, that they'll get used to it.
Yeah.
Which they may appear to.
They'll become more defended.
They usually, not always, but often that means, yes, they've become more defended. They've numbed out those feelings.
Yeah. But are we helping them to stay connected?
Yeah. Right. On the other hand, we could be helping the relationship to the teacher. We could be helping them hold on to us while they're apart. And then they grow in their ability to be apart from us.
And next session, we'll look at the depth of connection, how that can grow.
How that grows. Yeah.
So for all of us, our problems begin when the separation becomes unbearable. This invokes our defenses. It also changes our experience of these three primary emotions. This change in our experience of emotions is a result of the child erecting defenses, and these defenses can and often do last even into adulthood. The first defense is an emotional defense. It's a defense from vulnerability. The child experiences emotional numbing, a tuning out of their vulnerable feelings. But with the numbing of emotions, we miss the resulting high-level pursuit to their peers, the alarm or anxiety stirring in them. We think the aggression or the attention problems are unrelated. We look for separate diagnosis. And we don't see that all of these behaviours are related. The first is intensified pursuit. And the common experience of many parents is this incessant clinging, this annoying constant demand for our attention. We just can't get away. We conclude the child's too attached. They're too dependent. No, there's no such thing as being too attached. The child's attachment needs are not being met. They're facing separation. It's not less attachment the child needs. It's more attachment, more connection. The pursuit can also take a depersonalized form of seeking recognition. The child may be totally obsessed about achieving the highest grades in school or to please. All of this is in the pursuit of attachment. They're seeking rewards.
They might look like a really driven person, though.
They might achieve great things. Yeah.
So a lot of this really looks really good on the surface.
But they'll become a perfectionist.
Right. Which leads to other challenges.
It's these achievements are not coming from a place of curiosity and emergence.
Right. They may, it's like those of us as adults who are, our whole life, we tried to get our parents' approval. We never got it. That kind of idea, right? It's like we were pursuing this attachment in a certain way, but it wasn't coming out of our own motivation necessarily to curiously try to create new things or find new answers to things.
Our pursuit can also lead to collecting and hoarding behaviours. I've seen this many times in adults. It's about holding on to everything, holding on to their clothes, hoarding the food, collecting things. This too is another form of depersonalized pursuit. And it can also take the form of extreme imitation. So the teenager might act, they laugh, they dress like, they talk like their peers. The more separation that's faced, the more desperate and persistent the pursuit may become. We will see problems with trust and worry as the child reacts with strong need for emotional reassurance. So more separation is never the answer. It's always help the child find a way to hold on when apart, to feel connected even when experiencing separation.
And we're going to talk more about some practical ways that we can help kids hold on. And
most certainly will when we talk about attachment in the next session.
mm-hmm.
We also saw in session 2 that facing separation makes us more frustrated than anything else. You see, we can't make somebody want to be with us. We just can't. It's out of our hands. We might experience rejection from one's family, a friend, a teacher, a romantic partner. And it's really hard to feel this futility because acknowledging rejection is really vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Our tendency with aggression problems is to subject these children to more separation, to send them to their rooms, to ignore them, to shame them, to take away what they're attached to, all of this to teach them a lesson, that aggression doesn't pay. We end up making the problem worse. Our only hope is to soften the heart of the child, so as one day they can feel the futility of trying to control the outcome of what can only be a gift. And finally, we see alarm problems. Now, we all have an alarm system. Alarm is a healthy and a much needed response to danger. It gets us ready for our environment, helps us to respond to danger and threat. We all should feel a little alarmed from time to time, such as when we face something new. For our children, perhaps it's swimming for the first time. As our feelings become numbed out, our alarm becomes stuck, and our mind is rewired to always be on alert. So in most situations, this is not helpful. The first feelings we lose is our perceptions of what is causing the alarm. So our mind has to make up what's wrong. What are we alarmed about? And we think it's the spiders, the dark, the monsters under the bed, anything other than the separation we're facing. This gives rise to our anxiety problems today. We're full of agitation and apprehension. We feel unsafe.
And so this goes back to our feelings. If we're actually feeling the alarm, we can connect it to, oh, I'm alarmed because tomorrow I've got a really big test at school, and I'm really nervous about it. But if our perception is lost, we might think it's whatever our minds make up.
Yeah. So we lose the connection between what is
a danger
and what we think could be a danger.
Right, which is where we can get phobias and all of that from. Yeah, obsession, compulsions.
Panic attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. The next thing we lose is our feelings of alarm itself. Child no longer feels scared or nervous. They don't say, I'm afraid anymore. But they're full of agitation. They're impulsive. They're reckless. And they still have some trouble sleeping. One thing they can't do is they can't stay out of harm's way. This might even get misdiagnosed as attention deficit disorder. Lastly, all that's left is the chemical process of alarm. That being an adrenaline rush. They become cool. They start doing things on purpose that are scary. They become attached to what should normally be alarming because it gives them an adrenaline rush. At the very extreme of this, we find those who are cutting and burning. The good news is, as we create felt safety, the defenses of the child soften. The feelings come back. They can again say, I'm scared, and the dysfunction straightens itself out. Then we have the attachment defenses. These are our attachment instincts in reverse. These all bring a solution as well of sorts to the separation that we face. We'll start with defensive dominance. You see, when you have to trust in somebody, when you need somebody to provide for you, as the child needs the parent to provide for them, it's going to set them up to getting hurt when the parent lets them down. And when the child does feel hurt, they're going to want to take control of the situation. They're going to want to take matters into their own hands. So the child's instincts kick in when they're hurt, and they begin to tell the parent what they need. They take control and become bossy.
Mm.
They tell the parent what the rules are.
This is how you will this is how you will hug me, or this is how you will take care of me. That sort of.
This is the food you'll provide for me.
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps in the car, don't drive while talking on the phone. These are the rules.
So instead of the parent setting the tone, the child takes that control.
This is a defensive dominance, and it makes parenting really hard when you've lost the trust of your child.
Do you think we see this more in teenage years? Or it just feels like that might be more when it can show up?
It can definitely show up a lot in the teenage years, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We also have defensive detachment. So if we anticipate rejection, we automatically put our attachment instincts in reverse. This can happen spontaneously and instinctively, even for us as adults. For example, if we see someone in the shops we've not seen in a while, we might turn around and walk the other way.
Because we're not sure if the attachment is still there.
Yeah. We anticipate rejection, so our instinct is to walk the other way. If you've ever picked up your child from school and they ignore you, they have this same defensive detachment. There is a disconnection there to be overcome that causes a child to hesitate coming alongside you.
So there was separation during the day. You come back together after school.
There's a bridge to reconnect. The child doesn't feel comfortable or safe to create that connection.
I've felt that, like, say, if I've been gone for a few days, say to a conference or something, or a trip, even a week or more, come back home and it's like you get pushed back, pushed away from. But it can feel really personal. We'll talk about that. But it's just the brain saying, I've got to reconnect here before we can move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's difficult if you're the dependent. You're very vulnerable. So instead, you might just push back instead. We had a friend who left their dog at our house.
For a whole summer. So like 3 months. Yeah.
And when the owner came back,
the dog ignored her. Just like had become so attached to me. Well, both of us, but more to me. And yeah, the owner said it was several days at least before the dog warmed back up to her. And I've heard this from other people with pets that kind of feels like they give you the silent treatment in a way. Yeah.
So these instincts are common for mammals.
Yeah, quite fascinating. And it actually does serve us.
It does.
Right? Like it helps us to not just give away our trust to anyone.
Yeah. So we mustn't take these attachment defenses personally. Rather, we need to set about reestablishing the connection that's been lost. We, in essence, take the lead in the relationship.
Even though it can feel personal.
Yeah. And lastly, we have defensive reattaching. Here we have the child attaching to other things, other people, that can't fully provide for their attachment needs. So this is certainly safer, but it's not better. Peer orientation is one answer for the child, especially when they can't seem to depend on the adults around them. However, peers cannot care for each other, and so this orientation becomes very dysfunctional. Attaching more to pets than to adults, or perhaps attaching more to things than people. Both of these seem to happen frequently in the foster system because the adults in their lives are not consistent. So they attach and they look for some other
And
attachment.
as we'll talk about in the next session, we all have instincts to attach. So we all need to attach to something.
Yeah.
And here is especially when we attach to things that are not the answer we're looking for.
Attachment more to groups than individuals. Perhaps we attach to teams or cliques or gangs, to subcultures, even to religious groups. Now we have some ideas as a response to defense. Here, again, this is not an exhaustive list, but hopefully just a few ideas, a few practical ways to head us in the right direction. And here what I've done is I've broken it up into the 3 primal emotions, the pursuit, the alarm, the frustration, and then some ideas around those. And then looking at the attachment defenses as well.
I think I just touch on the one about inviting dependence, the attachment defenses, that I think, especially like say in the foster system, you have a foster child come into your home, you over provide what they need. Like especially perhaps around food, an area that maybe the child can get their own food, but to make them depend on you and build that attachment, you'll provide beyond even what they need to invite dependence, to make that relationship safe.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk more about that in the next session.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And here I just want to share some ideas how defense and our Christian faith relate to each other. So here we're going to touch on a few definitions, and then we'll explore these more throughout the next two sessions. So for sin, so perhaps looking at sin as a state of disconnection, and also then our response to that disconnection that keeps us in that place of separation. Then temptation. Temptation here is because we feel that disconnection, we try and earn that invitation to somehow secure it rather than accept that it must be freely given. So this is a little bit like looking at grace and works. So we're saved by grace, not by works. Our temptation is always to work, to try and secure that connection.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't. It must be a free gift. And then shame. We'll talk more about shame in session 6. But shame keeps us from becoming known to ourselves and to others. It keeps us defended or stuck. The solution here that I've suggested is, as an adult, is for the defensiveness to be revealed, to becoming known. And then over time, emotionally accepting the unconditional invitation to accept the love of God. As a child, it's for the provider's responsibility to offer secure attachment. The rest is up to the potential God has placed within us. Thanks for joining us in this, and we look forward to connecting in session 5.
Thank you.
Thank you.